I'm joined by Dr. Ron Paul, former congressman and now a resident of Clute, Texas, running the Ron Paul channel. He's a former presidential candidate, and now he's living life just as a normal citizen. Ron Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, but it's not like I'm really retired, but I get to control my schedule a lot, and that's a lot of fun. So I'm doing a lot of things that I've done before, but more or less on my time, and with the places I go, I get to choose.
So tell me, what is it like on a daily basis for you now that you are out of Congress?
Well, it does stay pretty busy because we do a lot of the channel work, the Ron Paul channel, and we do a lot of broadcasts on that 3 or 4 days out of the week. And then I do interviews like this quite frequently. I still travel to the campuses, which is something I've always enjoyed doing and still do it because there seems to have been a good reception from young people, especially when I talk about the problems and what I think they as a generation can do about it. So I stay very busy. I have started a homeschooling program, which takes time to develop, but it's coming along quite well because I'm a strong believer in education, and also my Foundation for Rational Economics and Education, the tax exempt foundation, that's continuing, but it's mostly oriented around foreign policy. Daniel McAdams, who worked with me in Congress, is running that, and that is the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, but that concentrates on foreign policy. And of course, our Campaign for Liberty stays very active in making sure that people of this country know the reasons why we're supposed to keep an eye on our Federal Reserve System.
So sounds like even though you are retired, you are still very active. But tell me, what is it like after having been involved in Congress for so long and working on Capitol Hill to be looking at it now from the outside in?
Well, I've never felt like I was on the inside is the one thing. So it's not so much because, you know, if you're challenging the status quo and you come to the conclusion that the leadership of both the Republicans and Democratic Party are really essentially the same. So just look at, you know, the foreign policy, for instance. You know, leadership's usually on one side and the grassroots are on the other side. And we saw that come up, you know, when we deal with Iran and deal with Syria. So it's not a whole lot different because it was a lot of hard work just surviving up there and remaining credible at times without just, you know, fighting with people. So I worked harder there to try to build coalitions with some Democrats like Dennis Kucinich, who was open to many of the libertarian views, especially on foreign policy and civil liberties. So I don't see a whole lot of difference. Essentially, since 1974, when I first got involved in politics, it's always been the same thing, different vehicles, and that for me has been to argue the case for limited government and individual liberty and a goal of having peace and prosperity, which I'm convinced that the freer the society, the more likely it is that we will achieve peace and prosperity.
Do you miss it?
What, Washington?
Yeah.
No, people ask me, you know, what is it good about not being in Congress anymore? And I say it's not going back and forth. So no, I do not miss it.
So let's talk about legacy. That is a big word to use, especially for someone that is coming out of Congress, coming out of a very successful time in Congress. What do you think your legacy was?
You know, I have no idea, and I really don't think much about it because, you know, I went to Congress first in '76 and left in '84, and I wanted to go back to medicine and did that. Then I did get motivated, ran again in '96. But when I left the Congress in '84, and even after I went back in, I kept saying, well, about the most I can do under the circumstances, because the status quo is so different than what I want, the best thing I can do is quietly go about my business, vote a certain way, and then maybe someday in the future somebody will look at this and say, hey, he voted a certain way and did these things. And so I think that the views got more attention than I ever dreamed of. So if anything, maybe it will be recognized that the views that I, with many others, have expressed over the years have had an impact. But that remains for somebody else to decide, and only time will tell, you know, how much impact we've ever had.
Do you have any regrets? Is there anything that you wish you could change about anything that you did in Congress in the past?
No, I think that the only thing that I consider all the time is trying to improve my ability to convey ideas, to convince people. And sometimes I come up short, and sometimes I think I've done better than I used to. But it's more, the delivery. And I frequently said in the campaign, and people in the media would sort of make fun of it, and they say, well, he recognizes that his delivery isn't all the greatest in the world, but he's convinced the message is a great message. And I just work real hard on understanding the message from the very beginning, on understanding what Austrian economics all about, and why paper money is silly, and why it's not un-American not to go looking for wars to fight, to understand it and then convince others and do it in a way that it comes across as being very positive. So my goal would always have been, as it remains, is to understand the issues and to be able to deliver it in a better way, to be able to convince people of it.
For so many years, you were the libertarian voice in Washington, D.C., in Capitol Hill. Who do you think is picking up that torch now? Do you see anyone that's doing that?
Well, I'd have to give my son a little bit of credit. He's in the Senate. We probably don't have 100%, like no two people have exactly 100% on every issue, but he's the most libertarian, aggressive promoter of liberty in the Senate. And others are close to him. He has a group of people that think along these lines. And in the House, I would say somebody like Justin Amash and Thomas Massey and Jimmy Duncan, and on foreign policy it certainly is Walter Jones. So there's a group there that are very good on the issues.
So there is still a torch to be carried. Now, the Republican Party is kind of in a phase of evolving. There's so many things that are going on. Do you think that there is room in the Republican Party right now for anti-war stances?
Oh, absolutely. That's been the tradition. And the amazing thing, I don't think it's so much the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. There's a vacuum out there for this position in both parties. And I think philosophically, both parties are controlled by philosophy. If it's pro-war and pro-intervention and pro-Fed, it's going to infiltrate both parties. So I think this whole issue is not so much injecting it into the Republican Party, but injecting these views into the general public. And that's where we're having a lot of success, because it was the general public that finally sent a message to Washington about, Mr. President, we don't think it's a good idea to bomb Syria. And I think it had an effect. So we're making progress. There's a large majority of the American people now know about the Federal Reserve. They might not conclude what I've concluded, that we need to radically change the monetary system and have a gold backing to the currency. They're at least saying we need to audit the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve is very important, and they are responsible. So we're making a lot of progress there. But yes, there's room in the Republican Party. There was a time when the Republican Party was a much non-interventionist party, but there's room in the Democratic Party too, because in the last several decades it was thought that progressive Democrats were the non-interventionists and anti-war people, but they don't do such a good job. I mean, they're as aggressive as the Republicans are.
So right now we are in the Ron Paul Channel studio. Tell me about this venture.
Well, this came about by some people approaching me actually from California, and they seemed to know about how the internet was working a lot better than I did, and they knew what my Facebook was doing and thought there would be a market for that. So they had to invest a lot of money to build a studio, and the other half of the studio is in Los Angeles. So there's some experts behind that, and I said, well, what am I going to do? I don't know anything about all this technology. You don't have to. Just keep talking about what you've been talking about, and we'll try to get that information out for you.
And how's it going? How are people responding?
Well, it's very well. It's going very well, and our first programming started in August, and it's changed a bit because the people who run the operation are very, very meticulous in trying to find out what people like and don't like. So the program in some ways has evolved, but as far as I'm concerned, it's the same thing. It's just the techniques and technology are the same. But we do interviews sort of like this. I get to interview people too. So, and it's mostly on the subject of foreign policy and economic policy and the Federal Reserve, a lot of civil liberties as well.
So you get to be on the other end of the camera asking the questions rather than answering them.
That's right.
That's good. So a lot of people, when they see that you're still doing all of this, you know, they say, why not enjoy retirement? Why not sit back and relax and enjoy it?
I guess some people are programmed for that, but if I had to go home and relax and just sit there, I'd be twiddling my thumbs, and I could find something to read, but then I would have to write, and then I would want to speak out and this sort of thing. So my relaxation comes from staying very much involved. And so if it were very, very difficult, hard work that just was really distracting and wearing me out, you know, I wouldn't do it. But I would be more uncomfortable by saying, well, I don't want to be involved. So I get, you know, a lot of excitement from it. The fact that young people are interested doesn't wear me out. It sort of gives me energy.
Dr. Ron Paul with the Ron Paul Channel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.